Most women have been told their power lies in their ability to attract, in the curve of their hips, the softness of their skin, the unspoken invitation lingering behind their eyes. But what would you think if I told you? The most dangerous, the most magnetic, the most sovereign woman is the one who retreats into silence, the one whose body folds into stillness, untouched, unclaimed, as if draped in an invisible veil woven from restraint and ancient knowing. When the body goes silent, the soul begins to howl, not the howl of neediness, of frantic longing, of desperate reaching, but the slow, guttural, sacred cry of a woman remembering herself, piece by piece, in the quiet, in the ache, in the absence. Abstinence, you see, is not just the denial of touch. It is the crucifixion of superficial validation. It is the rebellion against the world's obsession with instant gratification, with transactional intimacy, with the illusion that your worth is measured by how wanted you are. There is something alchemical that happens. When a woman withdraws her body from the transaction of temporary affection, she reclaims her own gaze, her own rhythm, her own forgotten reflection beneath layers of performance. Abstinence, in its most raw, defiant form, is not just sexual. It is energetic. It is spiritual. It is the echo of ancient priestesses, veiled in mystery, of queens cloaked in discretion, of wild women who understand that their energy is currency far more potent than flesh. You, listening now, may have felt it, that moment when your body finally stopped performing, stopped, bending to expectation, and you heard it, the faint whisper beneath the noise, the voice that had been drowned beneath hurried hookups, beneath longing stares, beneath chasing the sensation of being chosen. That voice is the soul, and it only speaks when the body no longer screams for. Validation. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But how can a woman become when every moment she leaks fragments of herself into shallow connections? How can she embody wholeness when her worth feels tangled in the aftermath of fleeting encounters? Abstinence is the forgotten sanctuary, the temple where individuation begins, where you peel back the layers of projection, where you face the terrifying yet liberating question, who am I when no one is touching me? Most people aren't brave enough to sit in that silence, to stand naked before their own reflection, stripped of praise, stripped of pursuit, stripped of attention that feels like sustenance, but withers like dust in the morning light. But some women step willingly into that abyss. They close their legs, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They still their bodies, not out of shame, but out of unspeakable sovereignty. Because they understand the paradox, that true power is born not in the giving, but in the withholding. Not in the chase, but in the choosing. The soul, when given room to breathe, does not whisper, it roars. It shows you the shadow, the fragments of longing, of loneliness, of ache that no lover could ever soothe. It drags your hands across the broken edges of your past, the bruises of abandonment, the whispers of betrayal, and forces you to witness them, all of them. Abstinence is not just a pause. It is an initiation into yourself, into the raw, trembling architecture of your unresolved wounds, into the parts of you that ache for recognition beyond the softness of a kiss or the pressure of a wandering hand, And when you face that, when you sit in the heavy, trembling silence of your own body, the soul speaks. It does not flatter. It does not seduce. It confronts you with the vast, untamed wilderness within, the wild feminine, the sacred chaos buried beneath centuries of social conditioning. It whispers, then it shouts, you are not here to be consumed. You are here to be revered, but the world does not celebrate the woman who withholds. The world fears her. She disrupts the fragile balance of power built on access and appeasement. She is the siren who refuses to sing, the flame that refuses to warm the undeserving. And so, society brands her with suspicion, frigid, difficult, arrogant, because what they cannot possess, they seek to diminish. Yet beneath those labels, there is something feral awakening. The abstinent woman begins to see the architecture of her reality with brutal clarity. She watches as others contort themselves for approval, as bodies are bartered for affection, as souls are fractured in the desperate scramble to feel wanted, even for a moment. And in her silence, in her refusal, she transcends the theater of temporary desire. Jung taught that the unconscious shapes our reality, that what we repress, what we disown, governs us in shadows. The woman who practices abstinence does not merely abstain from flesh. She abstains from self-abandonment. She pauses the compulsive reaching. She starves the ego's insatiable appetite to be seen, desired, devoured. In doing so, she walks headfirst into her own underworld, where the fragmented child within still weeps for love, where the wounded maiden still aches for affirmation, where the forgotten queen awaits her resurrection. You see, abstinence is not purity. It is not moral posturing. It is rebellion against fragmentation. It is the reclamation of wholeness. You, listening now, may feel the discomfort rising, the itch beneath your skin when there is no touch to drown your loneliness, the ache in your chest when there is no one to stroke your ego into temporary sedation. But that ache, that is the birthplace of power. That discomfort is the crucible of transformation. Abstinence invites you to dwell in that space, to sit with your unmet needs, your raw hunger, your shadow wounds, without running, without reaching, without sedating. It strips away the layers of distraction until all that remains is you. And the haunting question, what have I been chasing that I already possess within? Most women have never tasted this kind of sovereignty because the world has seduced them into believing their value is transactional. That if they are not touched, desired, wanted, they fade into irrelevance. But the woman who abstains learns otherwise. She discovers that her essence, her radiance, her erotic mystique is not diminished by silence. It is amplified. She becomes the enigma the world cannot decode, the locked temple no man enters without reverence, the mystery that ignites longing far more potent than naked skin ever could. There is a mythos to the untouched woman, not in the physical sense alone, but in the woman who touches herself first with truth, who caresses her own soul with brutal self-awareness, who refuses to fragment for fleeting praise. She is the embodiment of restraint, and in restraint she wields unspeakable power. The masculine, in its most primitive form, seeks conquest, but the evolved masculine, the one carved by depth and reverence, is drawn not to the easily conquered, but to the unconquerable, to the woman cloaked in silence, veiled in her own sacred solitude, the one who radiates, I am whole, I am sovereign, I am not here to be consumed, I am here to be chosen. And so abstinence becomes initiation, a shedding of false power. A. Return to embodied self-possession, a quiet defiance that echoes through the marrow of her being. I do not exist for your consumption. I exist for my becoming. There is a moment, subtle yet seismic, when a woman in abstinence stops grieving the absence of touch and begins to taste the presence of her own essence. The quiet becomes addictive. The stillness transforms from punishment to privilege. She is no longer starving for crumbs of affection. Because she feasts on the banquet of her own returning dot, it is in this space, where the body goes silent, that the soul reveals its most ancient truths. You see, beneath the skin, beneath the conditioning, beneath the generational echoes of feminine compliance, there lives a force untamed by time. The forgotten feminine, the primal, intuitive, sovereign force that no lover, no fleeting romance, no shallow conquest can bestow, because it was never theirs to give. It was buried, dormant, waiting for the silence. Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine principle within both man and woman. For women, the anima awakens when she ceases to perform the external feminine and confronts the raw, interior feminine, the intuitive, chaotic, unapologetically wild soul beneath social veneers. Abstinence is the catalyst. It removes the noise, the performative sensuality, the curated desire, the ego-driven seduction, until only the core remains. But let me ask you, are you brave enough to meet her? The untamed self? The shadowed self? The self that does not beg, does not bend, does not barter. Most run. Most reach for the next distraction, the next validation, the next temporary balm to quiet the void. But you who hear these words, there is a part of you stirring. The ache is familiar, isn't it? The emptiness between rushed connections. The knowing sense that every conquest leaves you emptier. Every fleeting desire carves your soul thinner. Every touch that lacks reverence becomes another fracture. Abstinence stops. The bleeding dot, it stitches the soul back together. Not through external rescue, but through brutal, radiant, solitary self-witnessing. It is here in the void that she is reborn. Not as the woman who seduces for scraps, but as the woman who commands devotion without words, who magnetizes without unveiling, who speaks through her silence, her restraint, her sovereign refusal to fragment for attention. There is immense eroticism in restraint, the kind of power that makes men falter, that makes the world lean in. Curious, desperate, bewildered. The untouched woman radiates mystery, not because she is withholding out of fear, but because she is saturated with self. She understands the paradox. To be desired endlessly, one must first master the art of not needing to be desired at all. In abstinence, she ceases to chase the gaze of others. She redirects her gaze inward, tracing the topography of her own, longing, her own wounds, her own hunger. She sees the scars etched across her psyche, the moment she abandoned herself for a fleeting kiss, the night she dissolved into the sheets of those who never saw her soul, the fragments she traded. For whispers of worth. No more. This silence, this sacred withholding, It is reclamation of body, of boundaries, of the divine untouchable core that no one can extract, dilute, or diminish. And from this core radiates a force far greater than physical allure, the magnetic, Jungian archetype of the individuated woman, whole, intact, unclaimed by the world, yet sovereign within it. And when she walks into a room, veiled in abstinence, cloaked in self-possession, they feel it. The men, the women, the room itself tilts toward her, not because she offers herself, but because she offers nothing. And in that nothingness, they see everything. But make no mistake, abstinence is not the absence of desire. It is the refinement of it, the transmutation of raw longing into higher alchemy. The woman who abstains does not extinguish her hunger. She sharpens it, tempers it, sanctifies it. Like a blade forged in the quiet heat of her own becoming, her desire is no longer fragmented, no longer poured recklessly into unworthy vessels. It becomes concentrated, sacred, uncompromising. She learns the language of her own energy, the rhythm of her soul, uncoiled from the static of constant performance. There is power in that rhythm, the steady pulse of a woman no longer enslaved to external permission, no longer seduced by fleeting conquests, no longer diluted by temporary hands fumbling to possess her. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And how much of a woman's life is wasted? Chasing love that devours her boundaries, chasing attention that fractures her integrity, chasing connection that leaves her emptier than solitude ever could. Abstinence halts that wasting. It arrests the cycle of self-abandonment masquerading as romance. It draws her back to herself, the only home that cannot be repossessed. And yet, the world will test her. The temptations will whisper like sirens on the rocks, shallow promises of validation, the ache of loneliness wrapped in the guise of fleeting connection. But the abstinent woman listens deeper, beneath the ache, beneath the seductive lies, beneath the surface-level intoxication. Her soul speaks, not in words, but in the raw, pulsing truth that emanates from her bones. I will not dilute to be desired. I will not fracture to be chosen. I will not barter my wholeness for fleeting praise. This is the shadow work. To confront the parts of herself that once screamed for external rescue, the child abandoned, the maid betrayed, the lover discarded, and to soothe them not with another's touch, but with her own unwavering presence. Abstinence is not a cage. It is an initiation into radical self-trust. The world calls her stubborn, cold, unreachable. They do not understand. She is not cold. She is fire wrapped in stillness, magma restrained beneath sovereign skin. Her energy is no longer leaking into hollow encounters. It simmers within, expanding, electrifying every cell, every thought, every breath. She is becoming too potent to be overlooked, too whole to be manipulated, too sovereign to be seduced by scraps. You, woman listening now, imagine standing in that power. Imagine no longer bending to the ache of loneliness, no longer dissolving beneath wandering hands that offer no depth, no longer starving for validation that costs your soul. Imagine hungering for yourself first, becoming so saturated in your own energy, your own essence, that the world itself contorts to orbit you, not because you beg for it, but because you embody the impossible paradox, untouchable yet irresistible. That is the silent revolution of abstinence, the reclamation of longing, the dethroning of desperation, the quiet, feral awakening of the woman who remembers. She was never here to be consumed. She is here to become Dot, and as she becomes, the world shifts around her subtle, undeniable, like the first crack of dawn stretching across a blackened sky. Her presence no longer invites conquest, it demands reverence. Those who approach her feel it immediately, the unspoken boundaries etched into her aura, the silent shield woven from her own reclamation. She is not merely abstinent in flesh. She is abstinent in energy. She no longer leaks pieces of herself into spaces that cannot hold her, into hands unworthy of the weight she carries. This is not pride. This is not arrogance. It is the inevitable consequence of facing the abyss within, of walking willingly into the desolate chambers of her own longing, of stitching herself together from the remnants of every fragment once scattered for fleeting affection. She has touched her own darkness now. She has traced the scars of her betrayals, her abandonments, her misplaced trust. And in doing so, she has tasted a truth few dare to swallow. No one completes her. No one saves her. No one defines her. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the shadow, dissolving projections, and reclaiming the fragmented self. Abstinence is that process made flesh. It is the refusal to outsource worth. It is the sacred pause between who she was, fractured, fragmented, feverish for approval, and who she becomes, whole, sovereign, devastatingly self-possessed. But understand, this path is not without loneliness. The void, at first, feels unbearable. The absence of touch, of whispered promises, of heat shared between sheets once offered as currency, it can gnaw at the edges of resolve. There are nights when the silence feels deafening, when the ache rises like a tide, threatening to drown. The newfound sovereignty, but she stays. She stays with the ache. She learns its contours, its language, its wisdom. And slowly, the ache transforms. It becomes a companion, not a captor. A reminder that hunger is not always to be fed, but sometimes to be studied, to be transmuted. She pours her longing into her art, her work, her becoming. She cultivates her mind, sharpens her intuition, adorns her body not for conquest, but for herself. Every curve, every scar, every stretch of skin an altar to the woman she is sculpting in silence. The men feel it. The world feels it. She no longer approaches love as a beggar at the gates. She is the gate, the threshold few can cross, the temple not entered without offering. And those who lack depth, who seek only to consume, to conquer, to devour, they falter in her presence, undone not by aggression, but by the quiet, uncompromising reality of her wholeness. You, listening now, may wonder, does this make her untouchable? Does abstinence exile her from connection? No doubt it prepares her for a different connection. One rooted not in transaction, but in truth. Not in performance, but in presence. The abstinent woman is not starved for love. She is cultivating a love, so vast, so radiant, so sovereign, that only those forged by their own abyss, tempered by their own shadow, will recognize her. Only those who bow to depth will stand beside her. She does not chase. She does not convince. She does not dilute. She chooses, and only when the soul speaks louder than the body ever could. And when she chooses, it is not from emptiness, but from overflow. The woman who has walked the barren wilderness of abstinence knows now. Love is not found in the frantic scramble of the unhealed. It is not born from the hunger of the fragmented, nor does it bloom in the soil of desperation. It emerges in the rare, unshaken ground of self-possession, when two whole beings meet not to complete one another, but to witness, to expand, to reveal. But before that meeting comes the silence, and that silence is the crucible of her. Becoming Dot in this silence, her nervous system recalibrates. The phonetic rhythm of external validation fades. The obsession with being wanted dissolves. She awakens to her body not as an offering, but as a sovereign temple, an altar of her resilience, her pain transmuted, her joy resurrected. Abstinence reveals this. The body is not merely flesh to be consumed, but a vessel through which the soul howls, whispers, reclaims. She listens now to the subtle language within. The tightening of her chest when a boundary is breached. The pull in her womb when her intuition stirs. The stillness in her gut when a room, a person, a touch holds no resonance. This is the forgotten inheritance of the feminine, raw animal. Knowing long buried beneath centuries of suppression, diluted by the need to be chosen rather than to choose, but she remembers now. Abstinence has carved the remembering into her bones. She is no longer afraid to deny access, to say no without apology, to close the gates without guilt, to prioritize her energy like the most sacred currency she holds. Because in her silence, in her self-imposed retreat, she has learned this brutal, beautiful truth. Not everyone deserves proximity to her becoming. There is a reason ancient initiates withdrew from the world before transformation. The mystics, the queens, the priestesses, they understood that solitude refines, that absence purifies, that withholding resurrects what the world has tried to devour. Abstinence is that initiation for the modern woman, a rebellion against dilution, a rite of passage into unshakable self-knowing. And with this knowing, she dismantles the false power structures that once governed her worth. No longer does she perform to be seen. No longer does she fracture to be desired. No longer does she barter her essence for fragments of attention. She stands whole, dangerous, magnetic, not because she is untouched, but because she has touched the deepest recesses of her own shadow and emerged sovereign. The world will try to pull her back into chaos, into hunger, into fragmentation. They will offer temptations dressed as love, distractions cloaked in empty passion, false power disguised as fleeting conquest. But she has tasted the stillness now. She has heard the soul speak louder than any lover's whisper. And once that voice awakens within, there is no forgetting, no returning, no diluting. She is not the woman who waits to be chosen. She is the woman who chooses fiercely, sparingly, with the discernment of one who knows. The body may go, silent, but the soul roars Dot, and those worthy of hearing that roar, they will come. not to conquer, not to consume, but to stand beside her in reverence of the fire she carries, the silence she commands, the power she no longer surrenders. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.